Tails is a bit of a weird character. Despite being the sidekick to Sonic and one of the first characters added to the franchise, Tails seems to be often overlooked by the wider Sonic fandom. Very few people will call Tails one of their favorite Sonic characters, but not many will say they dislike Tails either. He's a character who is well liked, but scarcely loved, it seems, and as a certified Tails enjoyer, that kind of upsets me. While not my favorite Sonic character by any means, that honor goes to Blaze the Cat, Tails is a character I absolutely love and easily my favorite member of Team Sonic. There have been a lot of people who've talked about why they love Tails. There are aspects of his character that appeal to me that I feel often go overlooked. So today, I'm going to tell you why Tails is great, actually. Now, some of this may be a bit old hat to someone who's already a big Sonic fan, but I do feel we should cover Tails' entire character here because we'll be circling back around to some of the things I say here a bit later on. So, let's go to the beginning with Sonic 2. This is the game where Tails was introduced, and as a 16-bit game that wasn't an RPG, it was pretty light on story. It has basically the same plot as Sonic 1, but now you have a cute little sidekick tagging along with you to stop Dr. Robotnik. However, unlike Sonic, we actually get some backstory for Tails. Miles Tails Prower was born on Westside Island with a rare mutation that gave him his signature two tails, a trait that the other foxes of the island bullied him for. However, once Sonic arrived on the island, he blew Tails' bullies away with nothing but his speed, literally. After that, Tails started following Sonic around, and Sonic helped him discover how to use his tails to fly and propel himself forwards more easily. Sonic says that he thinks Miles' tails are really cool and actually gives him the nickname Tails. From then on, Tails would start to look up to Sonic like a big brother, and Sonic started to see the fox as his smaller brother as well. They would go on some more adventures, but it wasn't until the aptly named adventure games that we got another big plot development for Tails. In Sonic Adventure 1, we see Tails start out in the game largely the same way he's been in the past. He's a kid who follows Sonic around and does his best to help him out. He's generally shown to be a bit easier to spook and not quite as cool or competent as Sonic himself. We do get to see a few new things from Tails here, though. This is where Tails' reputation as a child prodigy starts. We did see him fix Sonic's plane, the Tornado, in the past, but this is where Tails starts to make improvements to the plane. While it doesn't go perfectly at first, by the end of the game we see Tails succeeding in turning a Chaos Emerald into a power source for the plane and making it into an improved version of the Tornado. Of course, it's the end of Tails' story that most fans remember. Here, Eggman attacks Station Square after his latest plan fails by launching a missile into the city. It doesn't work at first, but Eggman goes to track it down and turn the missile back on to blow everything up, and Tails races there to get to the missile first. But before he does that, we see a small moment of self-doubt from Tails. This is, of course, setting up for what comes next. After Tails beats him to the punch, Eggman pulls out his newest mech and attacks Tails. This is a pretty important moment because it's the first time that Tails has ever taken on Eggman by himself. Before now, he's always relied on Sonic's help, but during this boss fight, Sonic is not there to help him. Tails is obviously pretty scared here, but the town needs him. Station Square needs saving, so despite his fear, Tails pushes through and fights the Eggwalker, emerging victorious and being cheered for by the entire town. This is Tails' first, and unfortunately still his biggest, moment of character development. This is the moment where Tails went from just being Sonic's sidekick to sort of being a hero in his own right. The character arc here is really simple but pretty effective. You get to watch Tails go from a cute sidekick with some notable flaws to a fully fledged hero on his own merits. But most critically for this franchise, we get to see how Sonic influences Tails. One of the most consistent beliefs that Sonic has been shown having, and as a result one of the most common themes of Sonic games, is the importance of going your own way. Self-discovery and finding the bravery to be true to yourself is a very common theme, and something that Sonic has repeatedly, just straight up told other characters to do. So, it makes a lot of sense for his sidekick slash little brother to go through this kind of arc. It really drives home the themes of the series to see the main character spur the other mainest character, his sort of little brother, to go on an arc of self-discovery. On this arc, Tails realizes that rather than try to emulate Sonic, he has to embrace what makes himself special, and that idea is also something that gets repeated a lot in this franchise. These themes show up at some point for basically every character's arc if you look through enough Sonic games. Considering that this was the first plot-heavy Sonic game, I think it makes a lot of sense to put this type of story front and center. Okay, so far we've mostly gone over some pretty standard stuff. We've mostly just been talking about Tails' main character arc through the first couple of games as background for stuff I want to talk about later, but before we can get there, I want to talk about why people don't like Tails. Not like why people dislike him, just why a lot of people don't enjoy his character as much as me or some others. And I don't think that just regurgitating easily available information about his arc throughout the franchise will convince many of these people to change their minds. If you're a big Sonic fan, again, this is stuff you probably already know. Instead, let's switch focus to the reasons why someone would not like Tails, because there are two main things I can think of that would stop someone from enjoying his character. The first is a thought process that I think is really well explained in the PJ Show's Why Tails Was a Hero and How He Was Butchered, which is a video that is both very popular and I think was pretty influential. In this video, PJ starts by explaining a lot of the things that I myself already have, but then goes on to talk about how Tails was portrayed in the following Sonic games and delivers a lot of common complaints about his portrayal in them. And those are complaints that I largely agree with. I think a lot of other people, like PJ, are of the opinion that Tails is kind of a bad character now, just because, like most of the characters of this franchise, he's been written pretty poorly for a long time now. And if that's your reason for not loving Tails as a character, I understand that. I don't want to try to argue about why secretly Tails in Sonic Colors was actually a great character, because I don't believe that, and I don't want to try and convince you that a character being written poorly in certain games shouldn't matter towards your opinion of that character, because that would be a pretty wild thing for me to try and argue given the last big video I made. The degree to which a character's portrayal in any one game will influence your opinion of that character depends on when you played that game, what your expectations were, how you approach the franchise in general, and a ton of other factors that, while interesting to discuss, are not the goal of this video. The most I could say to someone with these opinions are just asking them about new Sonic media being made recently and how they feel about the character's overall direction. That could be an interesting discussion, but those discussions tend to be more interesting one-on-one in my opinion, so I think it would be better to focus on the second main reason I hear from people about why they're not big fans of Tails' character. The second reason why I have heard some people say they don't like Tails is that they just find him kind of boring. Like, they understand what his character arc is supposed to be and all that, but they simply don't find it compelling or don't like his personality or something like that. This is something I've heard from a few different people recently, and it's kind of what spurred me to want to make this video. Hearing so many people diss Tails' arc when I really loved it made me really want to talk about why it struck a chord with me, if not to prove those people wrong, at least to get my thoughts out there. However, I quickly ran into a bit of a problem. As I started thinking about this video and why I liked Tails and all the things that made me love his character, I quickly realized that this was a bit more personal than I thought it was. I didn't just like Tails because I thought his story was compelling and thought he was a fun character, but specifically because I saw a lot of myself in him, and I can't really explain why without telling you a bit more about myself. I did consider trying to write around my own personal experiences here because this is a video about Sonic, not an autobiography, but I just couldn't do that and be honest. So, sorry if you don't find this terribly interesting or whatever, but I'm gonna go ahead and talk about some of my own experiences for a bit. So, I'm autistic. I know, the Sonic fan, autistic. In other news, fork found in kitchen. But it was something that really affected me growing up, in large part because no one around me understood what the hell was going on. I didn't necessarily get bullied a lot as a kid. There were a few times that people were shitty about it, but more than anything, people just didn't understand me. I cannot express to you just how little people understood autism in my area when I was young. This is just one example, and I might be misremembering things because I do have a shit memory, but I do distinctly remember going to a psychologist for help with some issues I was having in school as a child, and they said I was, quote, too smart to be autistic. Just for the record, that's not how that works. Like, there's an entire thing called high-functioning autism, and I know there are people who don't like that term nowadays, but it was a known thing at the time that people could be autistic and still be generally smart and capable. This entire diatribe just goes to underscore how little anyone understood my symptoms when I was a kid. As a child, I stimmed a lot, which is that thing where autistic people will shake their hands or repeat some motion over and over to soothe themselves. I paced a lot, and I was just different to everyone else around me in a lot of little ways. I didn't face a lot of, discrimination or anything, but I still ended up feeling really isolated from most of the other people around me. I didn't end up with many friends because most of the other kids just avoided me. They didn't understand what my deal was or how they were supposed to deal with it. Even though I was never really bullied for my condition, the way that I was treated by everyone else did start to affect me. Feeling like you're different from everyone else and being isolated from your peers really starts to take a toll on your self-esteem after a while. Even if you don't have someone bashing it into your head over and over, it's hard not to feel like there's something wrong with you after a point. Why can't you just be like everyone else? Why can't you just be normal? Eventually, I would learn what autism is, and I figured out that, oh, that's what's been going on this whole time, but I had to try and find a way to deal with this by myself until well into around middle school. And at some point, I just decided that I didn't care about fitting in anymore. This was how I was, and I didn't have any problem with that. The way I saw it, there wasn't anything wrong with me, it was just that everyone else seemed to have a problem with who I was. And so, at some point, I decided that if everyone was going to treat me like the weird kid, then that's what I'd be. I would make being different and being weird a point of pride. Eventually, when I found out that I was autistic and that all of these things had a name, I decided I was proud of that too. Now, before I continue on too much, I feel like I should add in a few disclaimers here. I often find these kinds of things tiresome in YouTube videos, but given the subject matter, I do think it's pertinent that I explain a few things. For one, I don't think Tails is autistic. Honestly, he doesn't even have many autistic traits. I wouldn't even say Tails is directly a metaphor for autism. The most you could read into Tails' condition is that it's a metaphor for disability in general, and that's the main thing I want to make a disclaimer on. You know, taking something in media that's effectively a superpower and using it as a metaphor for disability can come off as kind of crass, because, well, disabilities are not superpowers. That is not how that works. It doesn't offend me, at least in this instance, but I can only really speak for myself and my relationship with being autistic. I don't even really want to try to speak for anyone else. People have a variety of experiences with a ton of different conditions that could get wrapped up into this metaphor, and I'm not even close to an expert on disability or even on autism. I just really want that on the record before I continue. Turning our attention back to Tails, one detail that always stuck out to me was, well, his name. His tails were the main reason he was bullied as a child, and so that's something you would think would be a bit of a sore spot for the guy. But that's never really how it's been portrayed, and we've already talked about why. Sonic immediately told Tails that the things that made him different were, at least in this case, what made him special, and he gave him a nickname not to make fun of him, but to celebrate what made Tails who he is. And that's a detail that I think gets overlooked a lot. It's also something that really resonates with me for reasons I already explained. Seeing a character take something that they were told made them broken and saying, no, this is who I am, and I'm proud of that, actually, is something that I didn't get to see a lot of as a kid. At least personally, I think that's a really powerful statement to make. I think that this also shines a light onto often overlooked parts of Tails' character and his arc. When some people talk about Tails, a lot of their analysis kind of boils down to the fact that Tails is, quote, just a kid. His general propensity to be a bit of a scaredy cat compared to some of the other characters, his timidness, his general lack of self-esteem early on, all of it is often explained simply by Tails being a young boy trying to find his place in the world. And while that is definitely a part of it, I can't help but see my own experience in Tails' story. Tails is a character who was bullied for how he was born, an experience that almost certainly would have had an effect on his self-image. Then he met Sonic, the first person who saw him for who he was, and suddenly the way Tails saw himself got turned on its head. Sonic introduced Tails to a new way of viewing his condition, and Tails took that idea and seemingly ran with it. Sonic even introduced Tails to engineering by letting him work on the tornado, something that would continue to be an interest for Tails into the future. Over time, Sonic would help shape Tails into the person he would grow up to be, but I think we could assume that all of those years of bullying wouldn't go away in one night. Tails would remain timid and withdrawn for a while, relying on Sonic's help and slowly gaining confidence until that fateful showdown in Adventure 1. That final scene of everyone cheering for Tails at the end of Adventure takes on an entirely new meaning with all of this in mind too. Now, this isn't just Tails getting accolades for a job well done. This is maybe one of the first times that Tails has been acknowledged by anyone outside of Sonic. At least it was at the time. The introduction of more classic games kind of changed the narrative, but that doesn't change the meaning of this scene, okay? It's not just a journey of self-growth, but also one of finding acceptance. Tails is a symbol, to me at least, that even if you're constantly told that you're not good enough or that there's something wrong with you, that as long as you stay true to yourself, you can do amazing things. Things that you yourself thought you would never be capable of. Now, that mostly covers the main thrust of Tails' character arc, but as you can probably tell, I haven't been talking much about the more recent games in the series. And that's because after the adventure games, it feels like Sonic Team decided to focus a lot less on story with a few exceptions, and as a result, a lot of the cast has been left in a state of limbo for like the last decade and a half or so. Frontiers has been cited as largely getting the characters back on track, but we haven't seen any more development yet because we haven't gotten a major Sonic game since Frontiers that isn't a classic era title. The classic era games are great, but they're set in the past, so they're not going to change all that much story-wise. Since I don't have that much more material that's in the games and worth talking about, what I want to do before wrapping up this video is talk about what I'd like to see from Tails in the future, now that Frontiers has established that the main cast outside of Sonic is wanting to go off on their own for a bit. But before that, I want to go over the directions that I don't want them to take Tails' character. For one, I don't want them to lean into Tails' history of being bullied anymore. That might sound kind of strange given that it's a big part of what made me love his character, but it's also a very old arc at this point. The Sonic series already has a bit of an issue of retreading old ground for its characters repeatedly, and while I can't imagine a scenario where the story is done well, I feel like it would probably be less interesting than a different story direction. Not to mention that character-wise, this is something that I feel like Tails has already largely moved past. He's had friends who accept him and the acceptance of a larger community for a really long time now, and while his past with bullying is something that will probably affect him to some degree for his whole life, it being a source of angst or drama would mostly feel like character regression as opposed to expanding on him as a character. Additionally, I think Sega has largely been smart to not lean into the disability angle too much. I talked very briefly about it earlier, but this kind of thing can come off really wrong if you stretch the metaphor, and you can end up saying some things you really did not mean to say. The level of distance they've kept with the topic is pretty smart because it lets people read into it if they want to, but doesn't really make any huge sweeping statements, and I think it should stay that way. Onto the things I would like to see from Tails. Personally, I would kind of like it if his personality had just a little bit more snark to it. I know there are some people that don't like the idea of Tails being sarcastic or snippy, largely because that's how he was handled in Colors and Lost World, and those game scripts are turbo ass, but I think the idea could work pretty well if it weren't treated like his main character trait. Tails spends a lot of time around Sonic, the guy who in most modern interpretations is known for being really quippy, and I think it would be a cute way to show his big brother rubbing off on Tails for him to snipe in with a clever comeback every now and then. Also, it just kind of makes sense to me that someone as smart as Tails could drop a really clever line here and there. More than anything though, I just want Tails to flex his independence from Sonic more. He and a lot of the other characters have been portrayed as if they just kind of follow Sonic around in the recent games, and that kind of just sucks. Tails is obviously a very capable person in his own right, and I think they should do more with that. The first way I can imagine them going about this, and one that I have mixed feelings about, is leaning more into the child prodigy angle. Story-wise, you could develop this with Tails possibly going to school and expanding his education, or if you wanted to skip over the realistic parts and go straight to the fun stuff, you could have Tails open up his own workshop or business where he builds technology not only for Sonic and his friends, but for the entire world. It could be a background element, a bit of world building, Tails Industries or whatever, making bio-friendly tech for the planet's future. Or maybe you could have Tails take on more of a mentor role in the same way that Sonic was his mentor, and become a professor or teacher, teaching other kids science and engineering and sharing his passions that way. I do kind of like the idea of Tails being a teacher, but it does feel like something he would do much later in life, and Sega doesn't want to age the characters up too much, so I feel like the first angle is something they would want to lean into more if they were to go in that direction. I did say I have mixed feelings about all this though, and that's mostly because it's just kind of doubling down on Tails' already established character traits. It does open up some more storytelling opportunities, with Tails now being in an unambiguous position of leadership and needing to manage at least a few other people and a lot of logistics. But it is mostly just developing his already well-established trait of being an engineer and a scientist. It's not really a new direction for Tails. So what are some brand new ideas for Tails' character? Now, all of this is going to be pretty speculative, and I don't want to go into too much detail here, but I do have a couple of ideas. If you wanted to establish Tails as his own hero and show how he's come full circle, a really easy way to do that would be to give Tails his own sidekick, someone that he can help grow into a hero the way Sonic helped him grow into a hero. This is kind of going back to the Tails becoming a teacher idea, but in a way that could be integrated into canon way more easily. I also like this because the way Tails would approach helping someone grow into their own would be so different to how Sonic does it. Sonic's influence on others is often shown as kind of effortless. He inspires others not through some direct effort on his part, but simply by being himself and living life the way he wants to. Tails would obviously be a lot more direct and practical with how he approaches teaching somebody else. Not to mention that, unlike Sonic, whose heroism is effortless and kind of natural, Tails had to work a lot harder to become who he is, and would probably try to directly empathize with whatever his sidekick was going through. This would give them a very different dynamic than what Tails and Sonic had, which would not only let you explore both Tails and his sidekick, but through them also explore Sonic in interesting ways. If you don't want to do that, maybe we could focus on giving Tails a source of conflict to solve on his own, and an easy way to do that would be to give Tails his own arch-nemesis the same way that Sonic has Eggman. Now, there are a ton of different ways to do this. You could come up with infinitely many different ideas for new villains, or you could just bring back the Battle Cuckoo Empire from Tails' Adventure, or anything like that. However, I have a different suggestion. Sonic and Tails have a sort of brains and brawn thing going on, and you could try to highlight this difference between them by giving Tails a more cerebral arch-nemesis. Moriarty to his Sherlock, if you want to look at it like that. And given the characters already in canon right now, I think we have a great candidate for a character to fill this exact role. Sage. Sage is already Eggman's right-hand woman/girl/AI, and Tails is Sonic's right-hand man, so there's already a parallel to work off of there. However, I think there's also a bit of an interesting parallel with Sage and Metal Sonic. Metal Sonic is built to be a better version of Sonic in every way, faster, stronger, and more resilient. However, Sage was never built to be a fighter. She's explicitly designed to help run the Eggman Empire's logistics. Her intelligence is already the thing that's being emphasized in the games the most, so it feels pretty simple to create another nature versus machine conflict where you compare Tails' mind to Sage's and see who comes out on top. There's also a lot to do emotionally here, with the common themes of found family in both of their stories that could develop into something interesting. I think that if you wanted to make Tails more independent, a way to do that would be setting up Sage as a somewhat independent entity from Eggman despite her loyalty to him, and making her Tails' main antagonist. Those are the main ideas I could come up with off the top of my head, and there's of course a lot more you could do. The main thing that I don't want is just a return to the status quo after Frontiers, though unfortunately I feel like that may be the most likely outcome from here. And that's about all I really wanted to say, though I feel like this video probably won't convince too many people to actually change their mind about Tails. I mean, YouTube videos rarely do that, but this isn't really an argument in the same way that my Amy video was. And that's kind of fine with me. Really, all I want people to take away from this video is a new perspective on a character that I really care about. Hopefully, after watching this, you can at least understand a little better why this character means a lot to me, even if he doesn't mean as much to you.